Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 28th season, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've created, what they're planning for the future. It's a broader net than only writers, however. We have had on musicians, actors, sculptors. So if you have an idea for an artist of any type who might be good for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the program. I also want to remind you that Cape Ann Television produces a lot of original programming. The Writer's Block, just one of many, many shows. It's a wonderful cultural asset for Cape Ann, about Cape Ann, and available through the website to the world. So don't pay attention to those dish ads. You don't get this cable access program service with Dish. Don't be tempted. Stick with us. Tonight, I'm happy to say, we have some variety to the show. We have a writer who writes not with the usual alphabet, but with musical notation. His name is Robert Bradshaw, and he is now a resident of Gloucester, although he started out in Bethlehem, New Jersey, where he went to grade school and high school. He later went to college in Columbia, South Carolina, the University of South Carolina, the home of the Gamecocks, where he received a performance certificate, a bachelor's in music, and a master's in music. After college, in '94, he moved permanently to Gloucester, where he lives up here, where his parents also live, and he composes and has a national reputation, growing national reputation, and also teaches at the Waring School in Beverly. Welcome to the Writer's Block.
Oh,
Rob.
Thank you very much.
I'm excited about this because I don't know a lousy thing about music, and I'm going to be asking, not to be polite, because I want to know the answers.
I'll do my best.
My parents had no background in music, and consequently, or partially, I have no music education, really. It's a flaw. How did you get interested in music?
To be perfectly honest, I don't think there was a start. I think that it's always been there. I was really lucky. I grew up in a very musical family. My parents were both music educators, and all of my grandparents and parents were musicians, and I grew up making music with my brother. So it just has been a part of my life since day one. I don't have memories that don't include music in some way.
Your brother composed too?
Songwriter.
Songwriter.
Yeah, fantastic songwriter. He's also a graphic designer. He's very talented.
I guess.
Yeah.
So from day one, you can't remember not being surrounded by music or enthusiastic about music?
Yeah, I really can't. I mean, I've always known music was a big part of my life. I, from very early on, knew that I would do it my entire life. I mean, I was convinced that I would be a composer when I was in grade school.
Really?
Yeah, I've never strayed from this path. This is just where I've always wanted to be. For whatever reason, it's how I express myself. If I feel comfortable thinking in musical terms. So when things happen to me or I experience things, I hear music in relation to them. I don't know why, it's just the way it is.
And you're happy with your career?
I love being a composer. I'm really lucky because my office, so there are two sides to being a composer, right? The same as, I guess, with most artists. One side is complete solitude, right? You're completely alone. It's your job to put the notes on the page. No one else can help you do that. So there's a lot of alone time.
Yeah.
But the other part of the career is unbelievably exciting because I travel all over the nation and the world, and I work with countless people of all levels, of all kinds, different kinds of music, different ensembles, educational ensemble, professional ensemble, solos, big ensemble, opera. I mean, it never ends. It's always different. So as much as being a composer is the same, the concept of me expressing an idea on paper that someone else can then translate and perform, that's the constant. But the experience is absolutely always different. It's just so much fun. I mean, just today I was setting up another trip that's coming up in a month, and I'm really looking forward. Just like,
that's great. An example. Where are you going for this? And what sort of music is involved?
This is a wonderful project. It's the Midwest, and I was commissioned to write a work for a band director at Willowbrook High School near Chicago. And he was retiring. He's a wonderful educator, and his family and the community wanted to celebrate his time at the school. And so they commissioned a work for me that included everyone in their program. So we're talking about a very large band, but also the chorus was a part of it, and string players from the orchestra played, and then there was the marching band percussion, and then alumni came back to play, and offstage ensembles and around. So that's
a lot of arranging.
It was enormous.
Well,
it was also electroacoustic, so it included pre-recorded sounds that were played during, and it was a very big project.
Oh.
And in order to make it happen, they created a consortium, which is really common in composing, where many different ensembles helped not only fund the work, but also guaranteed performances of the work. That way it would live on. It wouldn't just be this one moment that happened, and you get multiple performances. And this performance coming up 4 years after the premiere is the final one. It's the final piece of that puzzle. So it's really fun. It includes John Hagstrom playing the solo trumpet part from the Chicago Symphony, and we'll be going out and giving this piece one last hurrah here as part of the...
I know the Chicago Symphony has a pretty good reputation.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. I love working with him.
When I say you're a classical composer,
Yes.
is that accurate? Or is it complete?
It's both accurate and completely not accurate. The complexity of those terms that we use to refer to music, they make sense in some ways. For example, the term classic is actually a period of music, like Romantic or Baroque or Renaissance. And the term classical sort of refers to that entire everything, but it doesn't really, especially because when we think of classical, we almost always think of an orchestra on stage. And although that's great, and I love writing for orchestra, I do it all the time, it's a much bigger world than that. It involves lots of different kinds of music. It doesn't have to sound like Beethoven to be classical music. In recent years, a lot of composers have been referring to themselves as writing art music, and I think that's not a really great term either, because I view songwriting as art too. I mean, there's no distinction between those in my world. So I'm not sure that there's really a term that accurately, I think classical's the best right now because the most people might understand it. But if I were to be introduced to someone as a classical composer, they're probably thinking Brahms or Beethoven, Mozart, and that's nothing like what my music sounds like.
I think of classical the way it's used in popular language.
Yeah.
Anything that's not pop or jazz.
Yeah.
Sort of.
That's an awfully big world.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a lot of different music. I mean, my influences are of many different styles of music, and they all pervade my music. They're all in the music. So there is an element of jazz, and there is an element of popular styles or rock and roll or things like that, or Latin music. That's all in there, and it makes my music, most often people refer to it as sounding American. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means either, because America is a pretty big place with a lot of different kinds of music and a great, rich history of making music. So I don't think that may be that accurate either, except maybe here in America we're so steeped in all of these different cultures that makes our music different in some way.
As soon as you said America, I thought of Copeland.
Sure. I know everyone does.
Everybody, yeah.
Unfortunately, his music sounds nothing like what everyone thinks that time period. If you were to go back to the time period of that sort of cowboyish sound, it didn't sound anything like Copeland, that's for sure.
If you get a proposal from someone,
yes,
New York or Chicago or Midwest, and they have concepts that are maybe not what you would think of first to do. Sure. Are you open to that? Is it necessary to be open to that, or do you have ideas about what music should
that's a really good question. It's different for every composer. There are plenty of composers that run with the idea that it's all about expressing your inner thought or inner self, and it's only about what your ideas are. My world isn't like that. I decided really early on in my career that I was not writing music for me. I have the music. I mean, it's with me all of the time. There's never a time I'm without it. So if I'm writing music for other people, then I have to be open to what they know and what they hear and their experiences. So I let that inform my music. And I think that all classical, whatever classical is, composers have always done that. I mean, every major composer we could name visited some place, was inspired by the music of that place, and then wrote music like it. So I don't think I'm doing anything unique. I just think I'm really open to it. I like the idea. It's fun. Like, for example,
novelty and
well, not just
change and
novelty,
difference.
although maybe to address what people might call novelty. When I was out there in Chicago for this project, I was inspired by the fact that Chicago has many of the same birds that we have here. And I thought that was fascinating, because living here in Gloucester or Boston, it's some ways similar, in some ways very different than Chicago. So what I did was I recorded the sounds of bird calls that were similar, birds that existed in both places, and then I mapped out their calls both in pitch and rhythm and created tracks based on those sounds and used them as the basis of melodic structure for a trumpet work, where the trumpet then plays to that sound. And so that type of electroacoustic work that's both novel in some way, but also inspired directly by an experience I couldn't have had without actually going there, that's something I really enjoy doing.
Name 2 or 3 birds that are common to Gloucester.
Well, there were owls and pigeons and
gulls,
chickadees. No, there were, but I didn't go with gull because the type of gulls that are in different places were different. They weren't what I would see. I actually have several works. The first work has 4 birds in it, but I have a very long list. It turned out that Chicago is very proud of their birds, and they published these books all about the wildlife and the birds that are in the area. So it was very easy for me to look at that and look at home and hear. And I mean, I hear a chickadee every single day, and it's got several calls that are fascinating. There's some rhythmic and some melodic. So that just worked very nicely to create a melody for the trumpet to play, but also to create a rhythm for its accompaniment. It's just fun to be inspired.
There's
by
a
places
natural
you go.
example of being attuned to music that you have because of your background that I don't. I hear birds, sit out and listen, I enjoy them, but I don't know, except for maybe robins, I don't know one sound from another.
Oh, I'm fascinated by the sounds of birds.
Although I know mockingbirds talk too much. I know that. I asked them, please to stop talking.
Well, it's not just birds, though, too. I've written many works that are influenced by, well, right here, I've recorded the sounds of the ocean many times from all over the area. A couple of years ago, I did a project at Cape Ann Museum where I intentionally went places and represented sounds that I was familiar with throughout my life living here and brought them into the concert hall. But cars, machinery. I've been to the waterfront and record the sounds of machines, of fish factories and things, and the ice factory, and then used that as a basis for the music that I've written.
If we say the word noise, is that a misrepresentation of reality and simply a lack of understanding of what we're listening to?
I think very often it is. I think that noise can be anything. For example, I teach students, a lot of young students, and introduce them to what we're talking about here, classical music. And you know the first reaction, right? It's, oh, do I have to really listen to that? You know, if they're listening to pop music. But they very quickly come to like it. I've never had a class that didn't. And I've learned over time that we're teaching ourselves all the time. You know, someone listens to a pop tune, they like it, they don't just listen to a new pop tune, they buy every song by that artist.
Yeah.
You know, they
listen to the original one 50 times.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, they're, so in actual fact, it's their music learning. They're teaching themselves to listen to that. And they make certain neural pathways that make them enjoy that kind of music. So when they hear something really different, it really is noise. They don't have the listening skills to hear something else. So I think that with music, with sounds around us, with our use of the word noise, I think often is that we're not paying attention to the parts that we could connect to. And I think that there's an awful lot of things around us that produce music that we don't notice. For example, one of my favorite things to do, I haven't done it recently, but when the kids were little, my kids were little, we used to do it all the time. So whenever it rained, we turn on the windshield wipers, and windshield wipers don't typically just go thump, thump, thump. They have a rhythm, right, because they're flapping and stuff, and it could be like thump, thump, thump. And everyone in the car would then make a rhythm to go along with the windshield wipers because that's music. It's fun to do that. We hear it, but you have to notice it. And we are a society now where even the music we're supposed to be listening to is background, right? We put on our earbuds and we walk around and it's like the soundtrack to our lives. But if we're not focusing on it, we're not developing the skill to really listen to it and learn from it. And I think that goes to, if we're doing that with our music, are we paying attention to the sounds around us as much as maybe we could?
And if you're plugged in, are you
Are
not
you even
listening
hearing
to other
them?
people?
It's true.
Not listening to language.
Well, I love language. There are many composers who have worked with language, and I certainly have too. The different way people speak and the sounds and inflection, and I'm fascinated with it. It's why I love to write opera, because opera's the perfect moment where you get this bridge, this gap between singing and speaking. We're putting it all together, and that is a really interesting thing, because any opera you write that has a particular program, like a particular style, happens at a particular time period or at a particular place, there are things about the language that influence the way you write the music from that point.
I imagine it's especially true in political topics, in political opera.
Well, I enjoy those very much.
You do?
I do. Yes, I'm working on one right now, but I can't reveal it today.
Oh.
Yes, we probably all can guess, but let's just say in the last year or maybe less than a year, we've had a lot of really great resource material thrown our way.
I'll bet. But we won't mention any names.
No.
I don't want to guess.
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier I want to touch on again. You said you've been influenced by many types of music.
Yes.
Say Latin or jazz. Can you name in 3 or 4 fields 3 or 4 representative artists who have influenced you, either as performers or composers, lyricists?
Yeah. I think that I don't know that I could do that. And here's the reason why. Because there are 2 parts to the music learning. The first part are the people who directly influence me, that I could never get away from, whether I wanted to or not. For example, my mother and my work with her as an elementary school singer, or my grandfather as a jazz guitarist, or my mentor during college as a classical orchestral composer. These people and my experience with them inform every moment of my writing. There's never a time I write when I don't hear their voices. And I don't mean in a negative way. I mean they were such a part of my learning that our conversations continue whether or not they're with me. I know the things they were thinking, I know the way we interacted, and they really impact the way I write. But on the other side, the side you're asking for, which is a very important part of composing, you have to experience. You have no choice but to experience. And it's something I work with my students all the time. And in its most basic form, like you're asking, and I would be, for example, I want to write a particular style of music. And I've listened to 5 pieces in that style of music. No matter what I do, when I produce my next piece of music, I will be able to hear those 5 influences, very clearly. So in order to move past, like what you're asking about, the only way to move past it is to listen to hundreds of pieces and to not ascribe so much importance to one that this piece is key. Because if that piece is key, then it will show up in the music that you're writing as a dominant force, more important, and I'll be able to tell. So, yes, in my life, I couldn't really point to them like that because I've spent so much time making sure I don't have them. I could point, however, to certain composers or pieces in the past that I've not been able to turn off. They've been so influential that I can't ignore them. A great example of that for me would be Stravinsky. Stravinsky is a composer extraordinaire. I don't even, when I listen to his music, I am so transported and so no longer just me. I'm part of that experience that there's no way to separate from that until the music is off. And so there,
I know that feeling
do
occasionally.
you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have a strong music background. I've occasionally sat down and said, well, I'm going to listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony.
Right. Yeah.
And after I put it on, and I think of the Fifth Symphony, it's
Yes.
very extremely well known. I put it on, and after about 3 or 4 bars, I feel I'm doing something important.
Yeah, that's
I'm not just
That's
saying
right.
I'm making myself listen to some damn music
That's right.
because my background is terrible. I'm doing something
Yes.
important.
Oh, and not only, I can't turn it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't need to listen to music to hear it. I mean, it's part of our skill, right? The same as writing. It's so in there. I mean, I can hear the pieces, but there's something different about putting it on and experiencing it in the space, those vibrations in the air, and it's really a lovely experience to just let it wash over and just be transported to this different place. And I mean, there are so many composers and so many pieces and so many styles at this point.
It's just too much. And
it's too much.
It's an ocean, and it's hard to pick.
There's just not. And I wouldn't want to pick because I don't want to focus myself on it. I don't want to say that this is more important than that because they all have something to learn from.
This question would be a little simpler. When you get you make an arrangement with somebody to compose, how often do you simply compose, send out the score? How often do you also conduct, and how often do you also perform?
Yeah, it's pretty even between all of that, except for the performing part. That one I'll address first because it's actually been kind of a sticking point in my career. Very frustrating, actually. And that is, when I perform my own works, almost always the comments have to do with my performance. It's almost as if the piece exists separate, like it's happened more than I could possibly say.
So you shy away?
I do. I really try.
Your instruments, by the way, I don't know if we said that on the air, are
bass and trumpet. Yeah, and I love to play. I mean, I've played a lot of other instruments too, but those are the two primary instruments. It's trouble, and I don't want that. I want, I don't.
I understand. Yeah,
so I try and avoid that as much as possible. Conducting, that happens more often than I think it's going to happen. In other words, I'll have a piece commissioned, be brought out for the performance, and then someone will say, "And we'd like you to conduct it." And sometimes it's part of the commission, it's part of the process, but very often it isn't. Very often they'll ask me to take a rehearsal, and I'll rehearse it, and then, well, why don't you conduct the performance tomorrow? And that's a challenge, as a matter of fact, because the thought process of conducting is different than the thought process of composing.
But you do get another chance to shape.
Oh, I love it.
And I'm sure you've listened to your own pieces played by and shaped by another conductor, and you think, I don't know.
Maybe, maybe not. You'd be surprised at how I'm not concerned about that. Most composers really panic. Oh, no, it doesn't sound like I intended. Oh, this is a disaster. I really firmly believe my job is on this side of the music stand. I've created the idea, I put it on the stand, you interpret. And if you're not interpreting it the way I wanted it to be interpreted, then I really firmly believe that I may have made a mistake.
Something wrong with my notation's a little sloppy?
Yeah, something I did might not be the right thing. Or I didn't take into account something that's different about culturally or, of that area that makes them think of something differently than I would have, which only informs a better writing the next time. Yeah. I can't remember many performances I've cringed through. Most of the time, to be honest, and I really am being honest here, I'm not an orchestra. I will never be a trio. I'm a guy. There's nothing more than that. So that means without them doing it, it doesn't exist. So I better be happy. I better be really happy, because if they weren't playing it, that piece is on a shelf.
It always amazes me when I see plays that I've read, or I've seen in a couple instances plays that I wrote, how much variety and room there is within the words. I'm sure the experience is the same in music. It's just you can take the same piece or the same play with a different set of people, and it has different meaning. I mean, almost can be different,
radically
completely
different. But I like that. And I actually do it when I conduct. I try and conduct pieces different ways. I really want that, as a matter of fact. See, this is one of my biggest issues with composing. In the 20th century, we had this huge breakdown where composers were too smart for other people or whatever, and, and I'm smarter than you. If you don't like my music, you don't understand it, that kind of attitude. I really believe, I mean, you brought up Beethoven. Now, no one is more precise in their score than Beethoven. I mean, it's very precise. He labored over them. And yet every interpretation is different, which means what performers bring to the table is vital. If Beethoven is okay with all of these interpretations and living in the music how it evolves, I feel like I should be too. I think that those conductors and those performers, if they play my piece differently because of their experience, then they're bringing something to my piece I never could have brought to. Yeah. It's valuable. I'm only a piece of the puzzle. I'm not the whole puzzle.
Good. Yeah. I've found at different times in my life a little humility goes a long way.
Oh, yeah, that's true too.
So I want to mention, because we're getting down to the end of the half hour, a project that you and I are both involved in. You have been good enough to set to music a poem of mine about Gloucester, Good Harbor Home, Anthem for Gloucester, and that, it appears, is going to be performed in, according to our airtime, just a couple of weeks by the Salem Philharmonic.
That's very exciting.
February 4.
Is that the date?
I think that's the date.
Oh, I didn't know the date, so now I know something.
I think that's the date. Now, we're recording earlier, so that could change, but I believe it's February 4.
That's exciting.
Salem Philharmonic. Wow. Can you tell us about that score?
Well, absolutely. First of all, I'm very grateful for you even asking and for us, collaborating on it, because I think it's been a long time coming. We've known each other for a long time, and it's really special. That's one of my favorite things about composing, is when things sort of come together over time and then create that moment when the art is going to happen. And the score itself was really conscious of not wanting to manipulate what you had written. See, there are many ways to set poetry. You can set it like a song, or you can speak it, or you can chant it. I mean, every composer's done it every conceivable way. I mentioned Stravinsky before. He certainly did, lots of different ways. But I wanted to make sure that in your work that we didn't do that, because it's such a standalone piece of art. If I change your art, I diminish your art. I didn't want to do that. It had to be a complement in some way. So I was really inspired by it. I've known the piece. And when I worked on the score itself, I made sure that it was both. So the piece, as it works, starts with a very long musical introduction that is intended to separate the audience from the normal daily thing. So we're not jumping right into your poem, because that's too much. That's oh, now there's music, oh, now there's speaking. It's divided thought.
And I think you mentioned it's about 4 minutes?
Or a bit longer than
5,
that. Yeah, it's more like 10.
The opening.
Well, no, the opening is about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. About a third of the piece, I would say, is somewhere in there. When you speak, though, which I hope you'll be the one narrating at the concert.
Yes.
That'd be great. I treat it, because there were 4 major stanzas, I treat each one of them differently, so that there is an emotional arc in that part of the song as well as the music, so that they can come together at the end. And so what I mean by that is, the first time that we hear the poetry spoken, the music doesn't stop. It becomes accompaniment. It's quiet. It's behind. There's no melodic content. There's nothing that would overshadow the text. But what happens is, we start from this place of lots of music and our poetry, and we move closer and closer together until we get to that 4th place, and in that place the music stops completely. So now we haven't jolted anyone out, because we've introduced it slowly. Now we're comfortable with the idea of music and speaking. We've heard most of the story, but we come to that moment, and it's a beautiful moment in the poem, of course, but also it's that moment in the music, right? That arc where we're going to have to hit a climactic moment. And it's only speaking, it's not music.
I can't wait to tell you the truth. And I love talking about the idea of how music and words join. And similar to in a play, how the set is going to speak to the thematic content of the words. We're out of time.
Oh, there we go.
Rob Bradshaw, I want to thank you very much for sharing a music world with us and coming down to spend some time with the Writer's Block.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you in cable TV land as well. If you've learned something about composer Rob Bradshaw's career and the world of music that he lives in and creates, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.